So, I guess without further ado, welcome to Jewish Mysticism Lessons in Tanya, Season V, right? Season 5. And the topic of today's lesson of this course is going to be negative emotions. Up until today, so Rachel, for you're one of the newer ones. So there are some other new people that we're expecting that are joining now.
Oh, I thought it was the first day.
This is the first day. So let me clarify. So this book is called the Practical Tanya. Okay, and the Tanya is one of the foremost works of Jewish mysticism, written by the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe. So whenever you hear somebody talk about Chabad philosophy or Chabad Hasidic philosophy, that's based on this book. The book is divided into 53 chapters, and you don't learn it in one long go. We've been using the Practical Tanya, and if you open up to the first page, over here, Rachel, or for anybody else, you open up to this page, you'll see how it's divided into sort of courses, different topics. So currently we're in the 5th course, which we've just started. We break before the holidays, and that's called Negative Emotions. And so yes, it's brand new, but it also fits into the context of the whole book and the point that he's trying to make throughout the whole book. The point that the Alter Rebbe has been trying to make throughout the entire composition of the Tanya is that serving God is a lot easier than we think. Developing a love of God, being able to actually connect with God, pray to God, connect with our fellow human beings, love our fellow human beings is a lot easier than we think. And up until today, in the Tanya, so I'll summarize briefly for you, Rachel, and then if anybody else walks in. Up until today, basically we've been discussing emotions for God, for the most part. Right? It's been mainly about positive emotions, love, a little bit about fear, but all in relation to God. Right? And we've discussed, as a result, our spiritual makeup, the different souls that we have, the different inclinations that we have, and exactly how we go about through our lives, the different meditations we can use, right? What is and what isn't valuable to God? Does the world not exist? All sorts of big philosophical questions. In this course, the Alter Rebbe is going to tackle negative emotions. So it's going to deal primarily with the battle within ourselves. We're going to talk about getting angry. We're going to talk about getting depressed. We're going to talk about dealing with suffering, dealing with sadness, and all of these things in the context of, are they ever a good thing? Okay, is it ever a good thing to have certain negative emotions? Is it ever a good thing to be angry? Is it ever a good thing to be depressed? Is it ever a good thing to be sad, etc.? Negative emotions. And more importantly, because we know it's definitely not a good thing all the time, right? Mm-hmm. So when is it good, when is it not good? But more importantly, how can we learn to be in control of them as opposed to them being in control of us? Which I think is a question that almost every human being on the planet struggles with, right? We go about throughout our day-to-day lives, whether it's finances that put you down, whether it's your relationship part of your life, whether it's your personality, whether it's your character, whether it's your service of God. Certain people get down when they're not connected to God, right? And that's going to be the goal over the course of these 5 lessons, right? So chapter 26, 27, 28, 29, and 30. We're going to talk about judging other people. We're going to talk about spiritual insensitivity, what it means to be sensitive to someone else, what it means not to be sensitive to someone else. We're going to talk about how to control our minds. All right, so there's wandering minds. Sometimes we find that we're very good at, when we're in control of our lives, being able to control things, but so often we find that our mind wanders. Right? I'm trying to focus on whatever it is. Right? I'm in a relationship with someone. I'm trying to focus on listening to them and caring for them, etc. My mind is wandering, partially because I am a selfish human being. Right? But how do we learn to control that? How to deal with our imperfections. And in today's lesson, I've been going backwards through the lessons. In today's lesson, depression, suffering, and a different perspective on sadness. Okay? I will say that chapter...
Other than my own perspective.
I will say that chapter 26 is probably one of my favorite chapters of the Tanya. Before the class, I bumped into Rabbi Stalik as he's walking through the hallway. And he says, Anu, so which parak are you doing today? Which chapter of Tanya are you doing today? Well, I said, we're starting a new course. We're doing chapter 26. He goes, parak chavav. Because parak chavav is always like I remember in yeshiva, if any bacher, if any yeshiva student was ever struggling with sadness or depression, the rabbis would say, why don't you learn chapter 26 of Tanya? I know we're only holding 10 or we're already holding 40. Chapter 26 of Tanya deals with this on a very strong level.
What are you saying? Something Havav?
Chavav means
name.
26. No, Chavav is the Hebrew numbers, the Hebrew letters for 26.
Very sorry.
That's okay. And so that's what we're going to tackle today. All right, everybody on board?
Yep.
So here we go. So chapter 26 of Tanya, the first lesson of negative emotions. The page number is 296 in the Tanya, chapter 26. And the handout, of course, we're in handout number 26, which accompanies chapter 26. Everybody has one, so we'll go along with that. So as always, the way we go through the lesson is we're not going to go through the actual words of the Tanya inside. That would be too exhaustive and would take us too long. I encourage you to do that either before or after the class, or to read inside while I'm summarizing outside. But I will give over all the content that there is in this in this chapter, and I'll try to do so in a storytelling format, and an interesting format, to go through it and to give it life. Again, as always, questions, interruptions are encouraged. This is a dialogue, not a monologue. So Jewish mysticism lessons in Tanya, chapter 26, handling negative emotions. So another way of looking at the beginning of this chapter, and the way that Rabbi Miller, who is the author of this Tanya, this adaptation of the Tanya, puts it, is that up until today we've been dealing with how to achieve emotions for God, right? So, okay, you figure out a meditative state that gets you towards a situation where you actually love God, and therefore you want to do what God wants, and that leads you to be a moral human being, right? So you recognize, and we've discussed different meditations that there can be, you recognize that God is all encompassing and is all over the world, that everybody really is a part of God and a child of God, and therefore that leads you to love other people. Therefore it leads you not to do negative things to other people. Okay, that's with regards to Avat Yisrael, loving other Jews. With regards to davening, prayer, right? So obviously we want that our prayers should be infused with meaning. So there are different meditations that we can use to evoke a love for God during prayer. But let's talk about how to maintain that, because we all know that there are other emotions reigning within us, and there's other feelings that are constantly raging within us. So how do we maintain that? The analogy that the Alter Rebbe opens with, and it's what he calls a basic principle in life, is that spiritual fighting is very akin to physical fighting.
Where is that in here?
In the Tanya, chapter 26, on the first section 1, which it actually begins on page 295. The bottom of page 295. The words begin at 296. You with me? A basic principle in life. And so he introduces a basic concept. He says, if you want to figure out how to be successful in a spiritual fight, right? Your emotions are raging within you, and I don't know, you have a strong lust or a desire to do the wrong thing, something immoral, and you want to control that and conquer that. That's a battle, obviously, right? Between our Yetzer Hara and our Yetzer Tov, the good side of us, the evil side of us, as elaborated upon in the first 25 chapters of Tanya. If you want to know how to overcome that, think of a physical fight. And one of the first things the Alter Rebbe introduces is that in a physical fight, it's not all about strength. In today's day and age, the modern scientific world has figured out ways that we can monitor strength, right? Yeah, anybody ever been to an amusement park where you take those big hammers and you slam down on the thing? How high you can get, right? Okay. How many pounds you can bench press? These are all measurements of how much physical strength you have, right? Obviously, physical strength is not all what it is. There's also tactical fighting, right? But even beyond, and all of these things are true in the analogy as well. In other words, they hold true on both ends. In spiritual fighting, of course, there is also strength. There is spiritual strength that a person can have. And there is tactical strength that a person can have. But in addition to those two, there's also something called morale. Right? We all know that you can be the strongest person in the world, you can have the best tactics in the world, but if immediately before the fight, you get into a verbal disagreement with your spouse, and your mind is tumultuous and there's too much going on, or somebody tells you something that really hurts you to the core emotionally, not physically. Why should that have anything to do with the physical fight? And yet somehow, because the person is heavy on the inside, because they're weighted on the inside, they can't fight properly. Says the Alter Rebbe, the same is true of the battle with the nefesh of a hamid, with the animal soul. How do you expect to win a battle if you're depressed? How do you expect to win a battle if you're lazy? if you're feeling down by yourself. Of course, yes, it helps to know what the proper moral decision is, right? Between, whatever, doing this or doing that. But beyond knowing what the right decision is, and beyond, I think this camera is a little off, I can't tell because the screen's not there, but beyond knowing what the correct thing to do is, and beyond even having practice with the right thing, maybe proper meditations and stuff like that, there's also the actual frame of mind that you are in, and that cannot be discounted. If you are depressed, even if you know what the right thing to do is, and you've never done the wrong thing before in your life, it's possible you will do the wrong thing. Because you become heavy. The same way that the person in the ring has a hard time throwing that punch because I'm not in the mood, I'm not interested. Right? We all know sometimes that's the whole difference sometimes between a successful day at work and an unsuccessful day at work. Right? A good day, you're thriving, and I don't know what everybody does for a living. Everybody does very different things. Certainly in your work, Pam, but whatever. In anybody's job, right? If you're in the mood, recall it, right? As if this is something we have absolutely no control over. If you're in the mood, you'll have an amazing day at work. And if you're not, then it could be a day where you slept enough, and you had a proper coffee, and the weather is perfect. And now these things may affect your mood, but if for some reason there's something else weighing on your mind, it'll be difficult to get through it. Everybody on the same page as me?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And that's even been shown with muscle testing.
Correct.
Physiology.
Yes.
I mean,
this has been scientifically proven in today's day and age.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah. Which mind you, you're telling me about being scientifically proven. I actually want to throw in later, which I didn't include in my notes, but that's a very good point to throw in later. Something else that they've proven scientifically. Let me notate it so I don't forget.
Strength, accuracy, balance, all of those things are affected.
As a result of your mood.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need to stress anymore why it's so important in the service of God, or in the service of God. Remember, we include anything and everything that's part of a person's moral makeup, right, or moral decisions that they make throughout their lives, is also going to be completely dependent on your mood. Now, this is not to say that your mood is not dependent on you. The Alter Rebbe has been telling us up until now that we can control our moods, and that's what we're here for. And this is why the Alter Rebbe says that joy is a foundation of proper service of Hashem. And we find this in the Psalms. This is brought. We find this throughout the Talmud. We actually say this every single day as part of the morning prayers. We say, "Ivdu et Hashem b'simcha," serve God with joy. It's paramount. It's paramount when a person serves God, he is joyous. And we were talking about the whole, the Chabad philosophy coming from this book. Think of the logo of Chabad of California, which is the dancing rabbi, right? Or the telethon, or whatever, which is all about why is joy. And that's not just something that they made up as a good marketing ploy. That's something that, even as far back as the Alter Rebbe's times, when Hasidism was still considered something controversial, those that were opposed to Hasidism would call them the Freiliche. They used to go, those are the joyous people. Yeah. They have no reason to be joyous, but they're joyous. And that's because, that's what, the happy people, And that's because, that was their way of calling them the crazies. But the Hasidim, exactly, they're not in touch with reality. The Hasidim always embraced that. They said, no, we're very much in touch with reality, and we realize how important it is to be joyous in our lives. Okay, so fair enough. We're all in agreement. Joy is a crucial component. So let me ask you a question. Is there ever a place for sadness?
Yes. There has to be.
You say there is?
Of course, yeah.
Everybody says there is? Why?
Cycle of life.
There's injustice in the world.
Oh, you're referring to sadness. Okay, I think most people in this room interpret it probably as part of like loss or something like that, right? Is it, when you say sadness, what are you thinking? Sadness because of what? Grieving, loss, right?
But there's injustice to be sad about too.
Injustice to be sad about in a person's life, okay.
Yeah.
Well, no, I mean injustice, like little babies in Africa dying.
In the world, well, even more applicable is the ones in our own lives. Sometimes we suffer injustice, or at least what we see as injustices in our own lives, right? And those two can also make us sad, right? Okay, so in those I would say maybe sadness, I'm trying to play devil's advocate here. I'm not saying there isn't a place for sadness, but maybe sadness is not always the right reaction with regards to starving babies in Africa or even injustices in our own lives. Mm-hmm. Many times we have a choice of what to do as a result of that. Grieving and loss, we don't, right? When somebody passes away, that's it, it's over. And maybe sadness is the correct approach as a way of healing, etc. But in the face of injustice,
actually what sadness is too.
well, that's part of the point of this exercise, right? So with regards to injustice, sometimes action is the best thing, right? There's things we can do about starving babies in Africa, maybe not about all of them, right?
So for me, it's a level of appropriateness where it's placed, whether it's good or not so good. So maybe it's appropriate to be sad that, oh, Shabbos is ending, that's so sad, or something that has to do with how we serve God. It's maybe an appropriate.
So let me
place.
focus the conversation, okay? Because we're getting somewhere. Let's focus the conversation. Let's narrow it a little bit, okay? We're not talking now, not sadness about injustice, not depression or sad. Well, let's not even use the word depression because that's very strong, right? Because I think if I were to ask the same question about depression, many people may say not. And the words depression and sadness are interchanged a lot. So we would have to clarify the difference between the two of them. But for now, let's try to narrow it down. Let's say sadness over one's status, spiritual status, okay? Or moral status. In other words, I think about me, I get angry all the time. This makes me sad. I don't want to be an angry person. Or I don't think that I'm as good of a person as I would like to be. And this makes me sad. Is that sadness appropriate or not? Anybody?
Yes.
Yeah.
Everybody across the board, yes?
I think you can do something
We're
about
undecided.
that. You can do something about that though.
Correct.
Which is why it's appropriate.
You're saying because the sadness inspires action.
Yeah.
Question, from your experiences, does that sadness always inspire action?
No.
So the Alter Rebbe has a solution.
It has the
It has the
potential.
potential.
So this is the point we're getting to. So the Alter Rebbe introduces the fact that perhaps one of the differences that we can say between appropriate sadness and inappropriate sadness is who controls the sadness. Right? When you are going about your day-to-day business, you're sitting at the computer, you're supposed to be getting work done, and all of a sudden you're thinking about the fact, I can't believe that yesterday somebody asked me to help them, whatever it was, or let's give the classic example, even though it's usually not practical, but an older woman asked me to cross the street and I didn't help her. And now in the middle of my business, when I'm supposed to be getting whatever it is done, I'm thinking about that. Says the Alter Rebbe, such sadness is inappropriate. It's misplaced, it's in the wrong place, but most importantly, that sadness is ruling your life. Does that make sense? In other words, who decided that the sadness should come in here? The very fact that the sadness should be here now. If you had a choice as to when that sadness should be, would you have chosen smack in the middle of a workday? Probably not. Almost certainly not. The very fact that it's coming at such a random time, uninspired by anything going on, proves that there's something wrong with that approach.
Well, yeah, but if you
the contrast to that, it says the Alter Rebbe, that focused introspection, which inspires sadness. In other words, when a person makes time in the day. In Jewish tradition, one of the most appropriate times for this is before one goes to bed at night, before retiring for bed, and we say the Shema prayer. Before the Shema prayer is a time for introspection. We think through our entire day. This could be 60 seconds, this could be 20 minutes, depending on what kind of day you had, right? And Hasidim were known for sometimes crying their way through. I mean, even Hasidim as recent. You can ask my father-in-law if you'd like about his father-in-law, Chani Rebbetzin Chani Hanoka's father, who was known for being a very well-known Chassid and who worked immensely on himself, on his own character and who he was as a person, which is why he was known as such a selfless person, etc. And you can ask my father-in-law about when he had just gotten married and his father-in-law would stay in his house very often. He would watch him say the bedtime Shema and see how long it takes him to say it. He would think, a problem reading Hebrew maybe. And no, of course this wasn't the case, because before one retires at night is a very appropriate time. You're thinking about your day. How was my day today? Did I do things that were appropriate? Did I do things that weren't appropriate? And by the way, this is a great practical takeaway from today's lesson. Take a moment each night before you go to sleep. And by the way, the bedtime Shema, if I may, actually encourages this. The bedtime Shema has some prayers that sort of precede it, like preliminary prayers.
David says that he went to bed crying.
Correct. David says he went to bed crying. There are lots of people. There are many people who have the custom to say Tikkun Chatzot, which we'll talk about soon. But as part of the bedtime Shema, in fact, the opening words of the bedtime Shema, which in a siddur can be found on page 141. If you have this at home, you can write that down. This should be a year of being on the same page. On page 141, the prayer before retiring at night, we actually begin by saying, if you have this siddur at home, you can look at that, and this is, I encourage you to say this at night. Master of the universe, I hereby forgive anyone who has angered or vexed me or sinned against me, either physically or financially, against my honor or anything else that is mine. In other words, we begin by forgiving anyone who has wronged us, and then we say, may it be your will, Lord my God, that I shall sin no more, right? And that if I have vexed anyone else, that they should find forgiveness for me. And in this vein, it continues. It's quite a few paragraphs. And so the Alter Rebbe introduces this as sort of a prism through which to view sadness. Because sadness could be a good thing, as many people here said. Sadness not only can inspire proper action, sadness can actually shatter us, which sometimes is a good thing. Not when it arouses in the middle of the day, that's usually a negative thing. And it usually won't inspire the right action. But when we inspire the sadness within us, when we inspire a serious introspection of ourselves, and that leads to us thinking about obviously if you think on a serious and real level about your own status in life, that might bring up certain emotions, right?
Redirect it.
And sometimes that can shatter within us negative things within us. Things like klipa, which we've spoken about, that a person could be tied into the forces of klipa, the negative forces of the world. The negative forces of the world. That's, the word klipa literally means a shell. And it's used to refer to negative forces because they cover over the good just as a shell covers over fruit. But most importantly, that has to come as a result of introspection, not as a result of, the Yetzer Hara decided that right now, and it's very difficult because usually it's I don't know what's the word, true, it makes sense. Everything's logical. It's logical that I should feel bad about myself because I actually did do something wrong. Right? I actually am not the most moral person in the world. Usually, we all, if we think about our lives for long enough, will find something to be sad about. If not, you're pretty egotistical. You know what I mean? Meaning because we're not perfect people. And as the Alter Rebbe points out, that this sadness, proper and sadness in the right place, actually inspires a much greater joy. Why? Because then the next morning or whatever it is, we write in the language of Chassidim would always say that by the bedtime Shema, one of the lines always says, Morgen wird sein gar anders. Tomorrow is going to be very, very different. In other words, no matter what it is that we thought about today, that may have been not so good, tomorrow we're going to work on that. And that comes with a joyous feeling of, I'm going to tackle the day tomorrow. And then you enter the ring, not weighted down, but appropriately pumped up. We good?
We're good.
Everybody with me?
Yeah, that's good.
Easier said than done. But that's Tanya for you.
It's a very practical way of approaching life because
100%.
through the night your brain is working on that which you have brought
Throughout the
forefront.
day. Yeah.
And so by the time you wake up in the morning,
You had a chance to. Well, now you'll be perfect.
No, I'm kidding, you know.
In your dreams, you solved all the issues, you're saying.
No, but yeah.
Okay, let's move on to suffering for a moment. Because by a lot of people, sadness in their lives does not come from spiritual service. And I include myself among this, right? Sometimes sadness comes from, let's broaden the term, not just sadness, right? Stresses, nervousness, worries, right? Come from personal suffering in our own lives. How am I going to make ends meet? Who's going to pay the bills at the end of the month, right? Why is my marriage not what I would like it to be in its perfect sense, right? Mm-hmm. Why did this beautiful endeavor, the financial endeavor that I had planned, I was going to sell this huge building. I don't mean that's nothing to do with you, but I was going to sell this huge building and then none of the buyer fell through, and we have questions why and that a lot of times brings depression. Perhaps more often than the spiritual service of our spiritual status in the world. Much more often, it's my life is just rough. I've got a lot going on. There's someone who's sick. There's someone who's whatever, right? How do we deal with those kind of things? So to this, the Alter Rebbe says, first of all, most importantly, it's important not to just fall into it. Don't let it control you. You control it. How does that work? We don't choose the physical circumstances in our lives. We don't choose when there's a flood that our whole house comes crumbling down. We don't choose when someone we love falls ill. But what we do choose is our reaction to that. It says the Alter Rebbe that doesn't come from choosing in the moment. That is the hardest time, and that is important as well. It says the Alter Rebbe that comes with having a plan. You have to have a plan for throughout your life how you deal with these kind of things. What is your attitude towards these kind of things? The Alter Rebbe begins by quoting a Mishnah from Berachot. We're in the middle of section 3 now, where the Mishnah says, just as kishem shevavarchin ala tov, kach mavarchin ala ra. Just as one blesses God for the good things in his life, so too should one bless God for the negative things in one's life, for the things that are not so good. I recently saw a great back and forth, a great back and forth. It was a conservative or non-Orthodox rabbi, whatever it was, not a Chabad rabbi, a non-Chabad rabbi, writing a very strong letter to a Chabad rabbi who mailed a calendar, he committed the capital offense of sending a calendar to his home. And the rabbi says,
who's home?
To this other rabbi's home.
Okay.
He was on his mailing list, he gets a calendar in the mail. And he says, what was that?
I'm smiling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the rabbi writes to him and says, the content of the actual feud is not as important here. I'll give it to you in brief. His issue was that he didn't recognize certain dates on the calendar, which Chabad does not recognize, such as Israeli Independence Day or other such days. And he was accusing the Chabad rabbi of not caring enough for Israel or not supporting Israel enough, etc. And the Chabad rabbi actually did a phenomenal job. And if anybody would like, I'm happy to share that with you. If you want a proper approach to understanding Chabad's approach to Israel, which is more nuanced than others, I'd be happy to forward it to you. Please email me after the class. I'd be happy. When I send the follow-up, you can just ask for that. I'd be happy to forward it to you. It was with Rabbi Vigler from Palm Beach Gardens in Florida.
Oh, David Figler. Yeah.
Is that his first name? You would know from Florida, right?
Excellent.
Yeah, Josh was very concerned about that.
About Chabad's approach to Israel?
Yeah, because we didn't celebrate anything while he was here, and
On what? On Yom Ha'atzmaut, on Israeli Independence Day.
Yeah.
So it's very nuanced. Chabad actually supports Israel more than some of the people who at least propose that they support Israel. But it's a little bit more nuanced. We take our values from the Torah. We don't take our values from anything modern about Israel.
more or less.
Yeah.
I'd love to have that material.
Sure,
Yeah.
I'd be happy to forward it to all of you. Anyways, now my point is that as part of the letter, and it sounds like most of you want to read it, so I'll send it out after the class. So the rabbi, of course, as always, when people write letters, they cannot help but also bash the person on what they consider a personal level, right? So he says, "You Baruch Hashem touting rabbis, where you stick in Baruch Hashem between every other word," and I couldn't help but say to myself, "That's such a compliment."
Yeah.
It's such a compliment. Why? Because the words Baruch Hashem, which mean to thank God, and the reason why we stick it in so often is because it's perspective. And this ties into the lesson that we're giving right now. The reason why, every time somebody asks us how we are, we try to train ourselves about say Baruch Hashem is so that we should try as often as possible also to think about what that means. It means that we don't just bless God for good experiences in our lives, but we bless God for what seem to be negative experiences in our lives. Why? Because that perspective of understanding that everything comes from God, what Chassidus calls hashgacha pratit, or divine providence, or the fact that God has a plan in this world, and whatever's happening to me right now, I wanted this can of Perrier, and now it's spilled over. I had a plan that I wanted it. For whatever reason, I wasn't supposed to have it right now. And sometimes we realize that later. Oh, you know what? It was actually a great thing that I didn't have that can of Perrier because I went somewhere else and they had a better drink for me. Whatever. Right? Life has its ways of doing these things. For those of you that were at the Torah through the Arts of Music, Rabbi Chaim Fogman has a song about Mexico, right? Where a man who misses his plane because he breaks his leg and then the plane ends up crashing because of a failed engine, etc., which is based on a true story. And lots of stories like this where people we think we have everything worked out and it's terrible what God is doing to us, but really God has a proper plan. And sometimes we never see that proper plan, but there is a plan in place as to why this negative thing happened to us. This perspective in the Talmud is called Gamzu L'Tova. There was a man, a famous sage whose name actually, they used to call him Nachum Ish Gamzu. Nachum, the man of Gamzu. Why? Because he used to say the words Gamzu L'Tova even more often than we say the words Baruch Hashem. Even more often than we say thank God, he used to say Gamzu L'Tova, which means this too is for the good. The famous story that goes on about him is that he was once sent as part of his community to sort of appeal before the king on a particular matter. I forget what it was. Probably they wanted to kick out the Jews or whatever, I don't know. One of our many stories throughout the ages. And the Jews put together an unbelievable gift for the king. A chest full of gold and jewels and whatever, they scraped down to the beer, whatever they were able to afford the community. And they sent it with this man, his name was Nachum Ish Gamzu, Nachum, the man who always used to say Gamzu L'Tova, this too is for the good. Anyway, he slept overnight at an inn, And either they did or they didn't know what was inside the chest. The chest was under his bed, and some no-goodniks came, and they took out the chest, and they replaced all of the golden jewels that were in there with dirt. Figuring, it'll weigh about the same. He won't notice until he's way later, and then he'll never know. Sure enough, he's further on the way on his journey, and he opens it up to make sure everything's okay, and he sees it, and he says, who would have thought this would happen? He says, this too must be for the good. There must be some sort of better plan. He continues on his way to the king. And he brings the treasure chest to the king, and he gives his little appeal, whatever it was. He gives it to the king, and the king says, what, are you making a mockery of me? I'll have your head for this. And he has him put into prison overnight. And Nachum Gamzu says, this too is for the good. And during the night, one of the king's advisors, who according to the Talmud was or at least commentary on the Talmud was Elijah the prophet, comes over to the king and says, maybe this is some of the magical dust that is attributed to Abraham. You see, our father Abraham, our patriarch, who when he was fighting the story of the 4 kings and the 5 kings, for those of you that are familiar, one of the commentaries suggests that the way he won the battle was that he would take dust and he would throw it at the enemy, and God turned the dust into spears and swords and whatever it was, bows and arrows and whatever it was, and that's how he won the battle, just by throwing dust at them. And so the king says, okay, let's try it out. They were in the middle of a war. They sent some of the dust to the front lines. Indeed, they took it, and they threw it, and indeed it turned into spears and swords as they were throwing in the air, and he ended up winning the battle as a result. And imagine if you had that kind of power.
That kind of mud?
That kind of mud. So he comes back and he has Nachum Gamzu brought out of the cell, and he says, thank you so much. Of course we're going to grant you wishes. Not just that. Let's empty this whole chest of the dirt. I'll fill it up with golden jewels and I'll send you back. So on his way back, he stopped off in the inn where he had been robbed the first time, and these guys are shocked to see him. They were sure the king would put him to death. Right? They see him and he says, they ask what happened. He says very innocently, he says the whole story that happened. They say, oh wow, we know where that dust was from. It was from the backyard right here. So they let Nachum go with his jewels. They filled up a different chest with dust, and they brought it to the king, and they said, here you go, we have more of that magical dust. And of course, as you can imagine, it didn't exactly work, and those no goodniks were taken care of. The point of the matter is that sometimes it takes perspective in life, right? Because let's be honest, even if that story would have played out exactly as it did play out, right? Meaning, let's not try to think about us and whether we would have had miracles happen for us or not have had miracles happen for us. Let's say the exact same story would have happened for us. What would have been your reaction when you opened it up with the mud? How much would your heart have raced? How much would your emotions have raged? How much would you have worried and been nervous or whatever? And then continuing going after the story, and then he would have said this, he would have said that. And each time you would have gotten nervous and stressed. For what? Nothing else is happening in your story that happened in his story. The only difference is that he had perspective. That to him he recognized that even if whatever's happened, and he could have been put to death. And to him he recognized that God has a plan, and he has it figured out. Does that mean that this stopped his service of God? No, he still did what he was supposed to do. But he had perspective of the fact that there's a divine plan. He believed in God. He trusted in God. And no matter what happens, there's a plan here. This too is for the good. Gamzu l'tova.
My heart would have come out of my chest.
Same here. In the words of the Kabbalah, which takes us to the next level, there are 2 worlds. There's the hidden world and there's the revealed world. And as opposed to maybe what might be our first reaction, our gut reaction might be that, the world of godliness is hidden, right? Because we can't see godliness. And the physical world is the revealed world. In terms of Kabbalah, no. Godliness is the revealed world. This is the hidden world. In other words, which one, right? Perspective. Which one is true? The Kabbalah talks about, quoting from the Talmud, where the Talmud in Shabbat says that those who accept suffering joyously are like the sun going out in its strength. What does that mean? The sun has a chromosome? No, not chromosome, wrong word. An ozone.
A corona.
Ozone layer over it. A corona?
A corona.
Did I mix ozone and corona?
Yeah, ozone is...
I made a big challenge to them.
Yeah.
I'm sure the sun has chromosomes, just like we do, no? No? Okay, maybe not. I was like, no chromosomes for the sun. Well, ozone, yes. Anyways, so the Kabbalah explains that just as the sun has this layer of this protective layer on top of it, which sort of denies us access to the actual radiance of the sun, those who accept suffering joyously are like those who are able to accept radiance from the sun, which doesn't exist in this world, right? This is actually told about Mashiach's time. When Mashiach comes, there will be no layer over the sun, and that will be able to handle the actual radiance of the sun. It'll be a reflection of the fact that on a spiritual level it'll be that way. You don't have to have analogies for God. We'll actually be able to see and experience godliness on a real level. Why are your eyes open so wide?
Never heard that one before.
Okay. We can talk more about it after the class. It's a departure from the topic that we're holding right now. What? We should have a Mashiach class. We should have a class on Mashiach.
Yeah.
I once did, actually. I once had... I think she knows. No, that's my sister.
That one, I think.
No, it was mine. It was mine, and it's my sister, and we are going out to eat after she's in town from New York, and we were going to go out to eat afterwards. We have a babysitter and everything, but I thought she knew that I was in a class. Now maybe she doesn't. And the reason that the Kabbalah compares them is because those who accept suffering joyously are tapping into a revealed world. In other words, they're tapping into a true revelation of what this world really is. They've managed to take perspective to recognize that there's more to this world than just a little bit of suffering, which seems to throw off everything in my little, reality. By way of a practical example, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, was thrown into prison for his efforts in communist Russia. Everybody familiar with this?
Yeah.
Right? For keeping Judaism alive in the former Soviet Union. And of the many anecdotes and stories that there are throughout, the Frierdiker Rebbe relates in his memoirs that at one point they brought him into a room. In the beginning, it was a capital offense, and they were going to put him to death. He was sentenced to death. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, they brought him to the room and they waved their gun at him. Said maybe not, because he wasn't being so cooperative in their interrogations. So they said, now maybe you'll start talking. So he looked at them and said, that toy doesn't frighten me. Right? And they said, this toy, which you say doesn't frighten you, has frightened many other people into talking, because it can put you out of your misery very quickly. I said, and he goes, whatever the words that they used were. Friedrich looked at them and very simply said, yes, this toy that you're brandishing at me makes other people afraid because they have two gods and one world. But I have one God and two worlds, and therefore it doesn't frighten me. In other words, what the Friedrich was saying was, with a little bit of perspective, I understand that there's one God. It's not possible that I'm taking my energies from one God and you're taking your energies from another God, and they're fighting against each other, and somehow this one might win over this one. There's one God. He has one plan in this world. What's going to happen? And either that plan is that I'm going to walk out of here alive, or that I'm going to walk out of here dead. But that doesn't change my heartbeat, because there's nothing I can do about that. And more importantly, there is a world to come. My body is not my main existence. And therefore, the fact that you might take my body away from me doesn't make me that nervous. What would make me more nervous, and this was the reason he wasn't answering the questions, and the reason why he flew out of the government, he completely rebelled against the government, and he led a revolution of Judaism and keeping Judaism alive under their very noses. What's more important to me is that I shouldn't lose my soul. I shouldn't lose my second world, my real world. Right? And I bring this story as an example of perspective. So, to summarize sort of for today, because we did things a little bit in a different order, I was just trying to make sure we covered all the points. To summarize a little bit, depression, which usually comes as a result of the sadness controlling you, coming into your life when it wants to come in, is a terrible thing to have in one's life. Whether over physical matters, if the fact that you have no sustenance, the Rebbe used to tell people who used to worry about their livelihood and say, oh, but where's my rent going to come from, and how am I going to make ends meet? That I would say, relax. Do you know how many little living creatures there are in the world? Huge ones, elephants and giraffes and lions, right? And how many little tiny ones, mosquitoes and ants and whatever, and bees. And God makes sure that every single one of them somehow finds where its sustenance comes from. little babies that grow up in beautiful homes, babies that grow up in terrible homes. Somehow, God has a plan for every one of them and finds where they should have your sustenance. And you think that your worrying and your nervousness and the stress that you're adding into your life because you're so worried, that's what's going to help it? God has a plan where it's going to come from. And it's going to come from there whether you stress about it or whether you don't. Right? So on physical matters, and certainly on spiritual matters, there is a time for these things. On physical matters, appropriately, one should never be sad over physical matters because Hashem has a plan. Over spiritual matters, which are the things that we have to control and we do have to do something about. Right? Not to say that physical matters we don't. Obviously, we have to make a keli, we have to make a vessel for our blessing, we have to have a job, you have to actually go out there and do something. This happiness doesn't lead to giddiness of like, oh, God has a plan, I'm just going to dance the whole day and then somehow I'll figure out how I'm going to be supported. Right? No, of course we have to do things. But the depression and the sadness that creeps into our day at all sorts of random times is completely inappropriate. And the only appropriate time for these things, and again, Chassidus makes a clear differentiation between depression and sadness, or bitterness and sadness, let's call it. Recognizing that as long as I feel negative about my current spiritual status and I want to better it, that's good. And it's controlled, and it's you designated a time for it, and that's when you're doing it, that's good. But the moment that it begins to take over your life and it's creeping in at times that you don't want it, it has to be battled on all fronts. Push it out of your mind. It's not the time for it. And if you feel like it's an appropriate feeling to have, wait. During the time that I'll let you in, we'll deal with it, we'll have a conversation about it, and then we'll keep going. Yeah. And with this we conclude chapter 26, handling negative emotions, a little bit of perspective on what is the appropriate attitude towards sadness, depression, suffering, and the like. Thank you all for joining us.